very dear friend of mine, Jack Van Berg, Hall of Famer, and his grandfather, Marion Van Berg, also a Hall of Famer. And I'm very fortunate to say that I'm also a friend of the fam with his wife and sisters, and they have put up with me for many, many years. So I'm very happy to have him, as he is going to give us a very good insight into the world of horse racing and the equipment that is used and why it is used. And it's very important because, as you can see, horses are individuals, and it's important to figure out what equipment gets the most use out of a thoroughbred. Wouldn't you say so, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. I think equipment changes are one of the biggest factors when you handicap races or see changes in performance. And that's the trainer's job, is to figure out what makes a horse go and what they like and what they don't like, and what can help them when they race. So that's what we do every day, is try to assess the different things, that their behaviors that they're showing us, and what we can do to help them, make the most out of the behavior issue, whether it's a flaw or whether it's a positive trait. We see if we can help them out and mitigate the negative and accentuate the positive.
Before we get started with, as you can see, all the equipment, kind of the show and tell this morning, was it inevitable that you would take out your trainer's license?
Not really. I went to college for aerospace engineering, actually. And
very far cry from a backside.
Yeah, well, they're both aerodynamic, so you work on that a little bit. But and after I got out of college, I went over to Europe for 4.5 months and traveled and worked, and actually started doing some equine over there. I was renting horses on the beach in Greece. And met a gentleman from Australia.
You poor thing.
I know, it was a rough life. I mean, I had it all going, but I met a gentleman from Australia, and I was supposed to go down there and work their summer bartending on the Gold Coast. And when you go through from Europe to Australia, you either fly through Tokyo or you fly through Los Angeles. And I told him, why don't you come to L.A.? I'll take you on a tour of the Southwest, and I'll work there for a couple months, make some more money, and then I'll meet you over in Australia to bartend. And I got to California, where my dad was based at the time, and never left. And so he got me involved in working in some workers' compensation issues, where we started our own trainers workers' comp co-op out there. And while I was doing that, he's like, why don't you come to the barn at 5 in the morning? You're not doing anything. And so that's I never looked back. So here we are now.
A lot of amazing lessons that you learned from your dad. You had a lot of time spent with your dad. What were some lessons that he taught you?
The little things matter. Details. I always remember, my analogy for Dad was, if he wanted you to go chop down a tree, he would rather take you with a hand file, because it was more accurate and more precise than instead of a chainsaw, which is the easy way. And so everything was always work with him. I've never met somebody that worked as hard as him, that put in the hours as him, that was as instinctual with him with horses. He just from the day he started with horses till the day he passed away, he was all horses. Everything. There was no, let's watch a Super Bowl, let's go to see a movie. It was all about the horses. He might watch 10 minutes of a Super Bowl before he fell asleep, but the next thing it was is dreaming about horses and then getting up at 3:30 in the morning and going back to work again. So it was about the work, and you put the time in, and you put the work in with the horses, and then they'll reward you. And that's how he lived his life.
And put ice in your wine.
Yeah, that's it. And beer.
and beer.
Milk. I mean, he liked his ice with a lot of stuff. He liked it on the rocks.
Yes, he did. I want to invite everybody to come in closer, because this is kind of a show and tell. We're going to be able to pass some of these items around. We won't bite unless we're poked. And then we might, the finger might go in just a little bit. We're going to start. One thing that you'll notice when every single horseman comes on the track, whether they're on a thoroughbred or on a pony, safety is of the utmost importance. Safety, you'll notice an ambulance down at the end of the ramp. Horsemen always have safety equipment on. You'll notice they are wearing a safety helmet and also a safety vest. So every rider has this on, whether they are on a pony or a thoroughbred. And you'll notice these are of a, they have to meet safety requirements as well. So it's almost not whether or not a rider goes down, it's when. It's inevitable.
And one of the things with these you'll see is, the reason they built them is whenever riders got injured, more often than not, it was a direct concussion and puncture. And so whether it was ribs or whether it was spleen or kidneys or whatever, it was always the concussion of the hoof hitting them. It wasn't really the fall. And so what this does, it distributes the impact so it doesn't puncture into their body. And so that you get a lot less injury on this. You might be body sore, but you're not going to get the more severe injuries to your torso, And I mean, your arms are still exposed, and you're going to get some broken arms or broken legs if a horse goes over on you. But this helps your core body and your vital organs so they don't get any, serious injuries.
And typically, Tom, the size of a thoroughbred, fillies are typically on the smaller side as opposed to the colts and geldings, but thoroughbreds range anywhere from 900 to 1,200 pounds, roughly.
So there's a lot of weight for
you.
Yeah, and if you get under a horse, you'll know it, and that's where you get more of your problems. But before these, the direct impact from the hooves and the horseshoes you'll see over here in a second.
Yes.
That's where you got your severe injuries, and this has mitigated a lot of that.
And also, thoroughbreds at full speed can get up to right around 40 miles per hour. So you figure jockeys during a race, jockeys can typically weigh around 115 pounds. So I'm not Sheldon Cooper at Big Bang, but a jockey at around 115 pounds, a thoroughbred weighing around 1,200 pounds, at a speed of 40 miles per hour, that's a big impact potentially. Yeah. And you think a full field of 12, that's not a good scenario to be in. So typically this is just a standard horseshoe. Horses get shod roughly every month. As you know, Oaklawn is a dirt track. Other tracks that have summer racing have turf tracks as well. There's different shoes for different racing surfaces, and horses are just like people. Some have feet issues, and there's different types of shoes as well.
Sure. And one of the things you'll see, too, and you may have heard, I don't know how much you follow racing, but there's a new legislation that came in called HISA, which is basically the Integrity Act for the horse racing. And one of the things they've found, and I contend that might be true, is you'll see on the bottom of here it's real flat. Okay, we used to have what's called toe grabs on there. It's a little steel plate, and if you pass this around, you can still see the imprint of it in there. Okay, this is flush. This is a flat toe. It's called the Queen's plate. But before we used to have toe grabs, and what they would do is when a horse's hoof hits the ground, it slides. Okay, it's imperceptible to our human eye, but when it does, it hits the ground and slides, and it gives them some leeway. But what that would do is like a athlete on a turf track, you would have a toe grab in there so it would get in the ground and they could grip it. Okay, so it's like an athlete running on a turf track that doesn't have any cleats versus a run that has tennis shoes. The athlete that has the cleats is going to be much more effective and move, have more grip. Well, what they found out through studies is they believe that little toe grab would change the angle of the foot just slightly, and it would cause fractures in the leg over time. I don't know if that's necessarily true because we don't run on a hard surface like this. We run on dirt or turf. But what happens is they walk back and forth in their barns on surfaces like this, either asphalt or concrete. And so over time, they say there's real microfractures in there. So now they've required us to go on the front legs, no toe grabs whatsoever. And so it's been basically legislated out of horse racing. So now all the front shoes you'll see are flat like that. We can still have a 4-millimeter toe grab on the back, so when they push off the back, they don't slide and slip, and that's where you get some injuries there. So the back shoes will have that little toe grab still on them. The front shoes no longer will have toe grabs.
So another thing that riders will carry are crops. The crop has really adapted over the last several years. What used to be feathers, which are little prongs of leather, are no longer allowed, and it's kind of become a Nerf type material. Tom, will you hold that real quick?
Yep.
I'm going to go get what is no longer allowed, and I will show you why. And getting hit with one of these, LSU. Come here for a second, sir. I'm gonna pick
the
on
LSU
you.
fan.
My dad was
We got a Razorback here,
was
so,
born and raised in LSU. I want you to feel this and kind of tap it against your hand a little bit. I want you to face the camera. Yeah. See?
Yeah.
Doesn't feel real good, does it? So I want you to let me see the Nerf one. Tap that one against your hand a little bit. Big difference, right? Big difference. So this whip, the red whip, is illegal. No longer allowed in horse racing. This is vintage. This is a vintage whip. This whip, the Nerf whip, is designed by former Hall of Fame jockey Ramon Dominguez, who was here just a few weeks ago for Hall of Fame weekend. This is the only whip that is allowed to be used. Horses are only allowed to be struck, I guess that's the proper verbiage, 6 times in the running of a race despite the length of the race. A big difference, right? Don't use that on anybody. It's only allowed on horses.
Nah, I want the red one.
Yeah. More effective.
But it's a big difference, right?
Totally.
So you can imagine a horse used to being struck a lot more than 6 times with that. Horses could come up with welts on them, could even open the flesh with that. So you can see why that is now illegal. And this is what I was referring to, those little leathers, those are called feathers. So you can imagine back in the day, guys like Eddie D, Pat Day, they could really get to a whip. I mean, I'm not going to embarrass Lafitte. They were masters with those whips. But as you can see now, using that, it's more like a Nerf whip.
It is.
So you can see jockeys will now just kind of, this is called flagging. When you see a rider going down, I'm sure you're much better at that, Tom. Yeah. Give me a flag a horse.
Well, the one thing I'll show you though is when you hear this one, okay, so that's what they were talking about when they changed legislation, is they were contending that if a horse is getting out or in trouble, a rider's in trouble, that they can use this to correct them, okay? It gets their attention. And what they contended is it's more the sound than the physical striking of it. And so when you hear this one, they still have the sound, but they don't leave the marks like this one does. It doesn't leave the damage to the body. And so that's why they've changed to this one here. And the riders contend now that they have an issue of, if I'm having trouble with a horse, I can't correct him any longer. And now I'm putting myself at risk or other horses at risk. And so that's why they're trying to find ways, for safety reasons, to keep a crop in their hand to be able to control a horse or to help them, change direction or whatever if they're getting in trouble with riding the horse. So that's what they're doing. When she's talking about flagging, is what they're doing is they're waving in front of their eyes. And so a horse usually shies, so they're fight or flight animals. And so when they flag in their eye, they see something there and they think it's time to go again. So sometimes the riders, when they're out of strikes, they hit their 6 maximum. You'll see them go to the flagging, and what they'll do is they'll wave it so the horse still tries to go forward.
So sometimes you'll notice horses going around a turn. They might want to get out a little bit. You might see a horse getting a little bit wide. They'll use that to try to maintain their course. But you'll notice when riders might strike a horse more than they're allowed, sometimes it is for a safety purpose as well. And sometimes riders might wish they had those old school whips on occasion.
It is. I mean, a 1,200-pound animal, wanting to do something that you don't want it to do and put you in danger. When there's another 1,200-pound animal right next to you, it gets hairy
it can
sometimes.
get a little scary at times. Yeah. So thank you, Mr. LSU.
Go Tigers.
My dad would agree with you. So another thing, that the care of horses starts very, very early in the mornings. What time does your crew get to the barn?
Usually about 4.
4 o'clock. So it's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There are no days off because the care of horses are reliant upon the crew that takes care of them. They eat before the crew eats. Their care is of the utmost importance. One of the things that is very important is a horse's feet, because when your feet hurt, you don't feel good. So this is a hoof pick. Tom? Oh, I was going to pick up my foot to let him do me. So one of the things, this is a hoof pick. Here you go. You pick out. Tell them what you pick out of a horse's foot.
Basically, mostly manure. Sometimes dirt. So what happens?
It smells like money to me.
So what happens is the hoofs have creases in them called bars, and dirt and manure will get packed in there over time. After they come back from the track, if you don't clean their feet or if you're overnight in the stall, and what happens is they'll get a bacteria in their feet and they'll have what's called thrush. And what it does is it's a bacteria that eats away at their foot, and it gets real sore. So if you don't clean them continuously, you're going to have issues with their feet. And like she said, when the foot is bad, the rest of the horse is bad. It goes up from there. My dad was a magician with feet. He basically shot. The only thing he wouldn't do is nail the shoe on, but he would trim all his feet for the blacksmith, and then he'd let him nail them on. But he was a master with feet. And to this day, everything we do, the first time we get a horse in our barn, is we go look at the feet and address the feet and get them the way we want them. But what this does, it's got a hard hook on it, and that picks out the mud, and then you can use this brush to clean the rest of it out. And normally what we'll do after that is you put in It's almost like an oil or a grease that you put on their feet that'll soak into it's basically like our fingernails. And so what you don't want your horse's feet to be brittle. And if they're brittle, they break away, and then you have a problem getting the nails in the feet, and they don't hold the shoes on, and you get more problems after that. But, the main thing about feet is getting clean every day, and then you can address everything after that is once you've cleaned them, it's usually 2 or 3 times a day you're cleaning them. You clean them before they go out to the track. You clean them when they get back. You clean them in the afternoon when you feed. So the foot care is one of the most important aspects of taking care of a horse, grooming a horse in the barn.
And we've shown videos during the races of, horses getting shod, of the blacksmith doing so, and we show them trimming the outside. It literally is almost like fingernails, so it does not hurt the horse. So when we show, a blacksmith putting in the nails, it is like a very similar. It's their hands, so to speak. It is like that nails. Similar material. Yeah. One of the things that you'll see horses when they come over to the races, this is very important, and this is 3M. So
yeah, there's varying brands of it, but the original one was a 3M brand. It's called a Vet Wrap, and basically it's if you've ever had an injury and they wrap a doctor wraps thing, it basically only adheres to itself, so it doesn't adhere to your skin or your hair, and it's basically a protective bandage for a horse. And so anytime you have horses, like you say, going, a 1,000-pound animal going 40 miles an hour, and they're continuously, when you watch them, you'll see them actually, they're at the back of their leg, their ankle, is called their fetlock. And what it'll do is it'll hit down to the bottom, and it'll actually hit the ground. And so some of those, if they hit and slide too much, there'll be abrasion on their thing, and it'll open up and it'll be a wound, and then you have to treat that. So these are multiple purpose, but a lot of what they do is they protect that leg. Same thing, just like you with a wrap on an ankle, and you're doing too, if you have an issue with your ankle, it's weaker, or you've sprained it or whatever, you put this on to give more support. But it also protects it from getting hit or cut from the track.
And it's also important that the groom knows how to put this on, and it's not too tight.
Yeah. We do, pretty much my assistant or I do all ours. We really don't, I know there's barns that do a lot of their grooms, but it's so important to us that we make sure we don't, because what happens is when you get up higher, they have their soft tissue, so their suspensories and their tendons, which are on the back of their leg and on the side of their leg. That soft tissue, if you bind it, you can get lesions in your soft tissue too, and that becomes a bigger problem. So you might be doing more damage than had you left that off. So somebody that doesn't know how to do those properly can really do damage to a horse's leg.
One of the key, I almost said key ingredients, one of the key pieces of equipment is a horse's bridle, and that is almost the steering wheel of
exactly right.
the horse. So this one needs some
care.
Definitely needs some leather, some Lexol. But explain now these are the reins.
This is the reins, yeah.
Which is what the exercise rider or the jockey will hold on to. And one thing that a rider will also do, specifically a jockey, is tie these into a knot. And that is, they don't want them too long.
Exactly.
Basically.
They customize the length to them. So when they get on a horse, I'll do a quick one. They'll wrap it around, and they'll bring it back through the reins. And so what that does, it shortens it up to where they can have it just on the horse's neck, so they don't have the long reins dangling. And what happens is this is the part they're usually using.
And now these are leather, but some trainers also use nylon.
Yeah. This is leather part here. These are called rubbers. This is the grip for the rider, so he has something to hold on to. When an animal this size and this strength is pulling on a 120-pound rider, they need some extra help. And so these actually give you a grip. What happens is these will get wet sometimes, or they have gloves on them, and they'll go right through your hands. And a horse, you'll see sometimes when they're taking off, and the rider can't control them because they can't get a hold of that. And so basically the horse is on his own. And so then this is the head stall that goes around, the horse's head, and then this goes in their mouth. And so what they're doing is this is basically your steering mechanism here. So you're pulling on this rein, it's pulling on either side of their mouth. Pull to the right, goes right, pull to the left, it goes left. Hopefully, that's what you're trying to do.
That's the
goal,
If it doesn't,
that's
anyway.
When you bring the crop back in and help them out to understand. So this is basically called a snaffle. Anytime you see a bit like this that has a break in the middle, it's called a snaffle. That's just a general term for this thing. And so really, we call this a D because the side of the snaffle has a D shape to it. They call it a D bit, but it's really a D snaffle. And we have some other ones here that we can show you.
So explain, Tom, the difference of, this is a bit. It does go in their mouth, but explain there's so many different types of bits. Explain the different types of bits and why there are different types.
This is basically the most basic bit. You'll probably, most of the time when you teach young horses to go, what a rider ended them have a bit in their mouth, this is usually what you'll use. It's the least aggressive a bit. Most horses, if you can teach them to respect this and respond to this, you're better off. What happens is horses usually react to an impulse, input, whatever it might be. A horse might be sore, it might have a cut in its mouth, somebody might have treated it poorly before, it might have had a negative experience. So what happens is usually when horses are reacting negatively and we have to correct them, it's from something in their past, or it's something bothering them right now that we haven't addressed or we haven't figured out. And so what happens is sometimes horses just, they don't have the understanding they were taught that this bit here is not strong enough for them, and they'll just basically take the rider and do whatever they want to do. And so then we have to change different bits that have varying amounts or very points of force that will change the way they hold their head, the way they hold their bit, the way the rider can control them. And so we'll change bits to change how they respond to the input from the rider. And so this is your basic snaffle. It's very easy on a horse. It's not as easy for a rider if the horse is tough, and so we'll change out bits if a horse is very strong or very aggressive or doesn't react to this enough that you need some safety or steering issues that you have.
And sometimes you'll hear the horse in the paddock maybe playing. It sounds like they're playing with metal, and that's what you'll hear the horse is playing with. It kind of gives them something to do.
Yeah, they actually have one that has a little circle, or they're made out of copper, or they have a little spinner in here made of copper. And traditionally those have been used because horses, when they get nervous, just like you or us, if like your speaking engagement and you get cottonmouth, the copper reacts in their mouth and it makes them salivate. And so they'll produce more saliva. So if you have a horse that doesn't do that and he holds his breath or doesn't salivate when he's in, you can put a copper bit in him too, and it'll make him increase.
I need a copper
production.
bit.
Yeah.
I get cottonmouth. I need a copper bit.
You do pretty good talking. You're okay.
That's a lot of jibber jabber. So, like I mentioned, horses have different needs. They're all individuals. So sometimes, we mentioned, horses might lug out. They might have troubles during races. That's where a different type of bit might come in. And a jockey might come back after a race and say, hey, boss, he lugged out, or he did something, or even an exercise rider might come back after he claimed a horse and give some insight. So tell us what this is.
Input from a rider is very important, and what they'll do is they'll come back and tell us behaviors that we can't see with our eye, that they're feeling in their hands or on top of them, that they're doing that we need to correct something. And so this one here is just a prong bit here. And basically what that does is it stops the bit from sliding through their mouth and gives the rider a little bit more control. So if a horse is laying out on him, getting out, and you're pulling with that snaffle that we just showed you, it's basically just going to slide through his mouth and you have no control. What this will get against the cheek, and it'll stop that from going through there, so the horse feels more pressure on him, and so it'll correct his. You'll see some of these that have multiple rings. This isn't as much of an example, but what happens is the more you drop off here distance-wise, it gives you more leverage, the rider more leverage. And so when you see a horse going down with his head bowed down, okay, when you see some of those, they'll have these 3 rings coming down here, and they'll put it on the ring on the bottom. What that does is that forces that horse's head down so he can't get it out and get it up. And when he does that, or he or she gets it up, that's when they get away from the rider. So it gives a little bit more rider, a little bit more leverage, a little bit more control. So you'll see varying bits. And the reason we use different ones is basically on the behavior of the horse and what we need to change, or what we need to help the horse out and change their behavior so it helps them and doesn't hurt them. So this is a prong you'll see, and this here's another snaffle. It's just a little bit different.
This is not a huge piece of Gucci jewelry.
Yeah.
This is
it almost looks like a designer piece.
It does look like.
But what happens is you'll see the triangular form of this one. I don't know if you can see that's the triangle part is right here. So it's a little bit more severe on a horse. It'll get on the bars of their mouth, and they can feel this a little more than that rounded snaffle that we showed you earlier. So there's just different styles, and most of these probably wouldn't use. This one here probably wouldn't use as much in a racehorse on the track because it's more aggressive. But you see this more like in a riding ring. Somebody's going slower and they're trying to get the more smaller movements of a horse. These horses out here usually are too big and too heavy, and you're gonna probably do some damage to their mouth with something like that.
What % of horses, Tom, would you say utilize a tongue tie? 99%?
It's
Is
crazy.
It that high?
If you watch now, I think there's more people going away from it. And what the tongue tie is used, okay, this is just a piece of fabric, a piece of cloth. And what we do is we tie their tongue. You pull it out and you tie it down to the bottom of their jaw.
It's wet.
Yeah, you wet it.
You
tie
wet it
down. I mean, some people don't, but yeah, I do. But what happens is a horse has a mechanism in their airways, and it's called a soft palate. And what they do is when they eat or drink, they flip it one way, and when they breathe, they flip it the other way, okay? And when they get nervous, they can flip it up on the airway and block their airflow. And so what this does is when they get nervous, they kind of push their tongue back in their throat, and it will flip that palate, okay? This keeps that tongue from flipping up and flipping that palate, so it gives them a complete airway. It stops them from stopping their air breathing. It's just like you or me if we were running a race and you had to stop, breathe, hold your breath the last 50 yards. That's what happens to horses when they do that. And so you'll see a lot of people use this to mitigate that. Lately, I didn't bring it over. I wish I'd have brought it over. We don't have a figure eight. But what they have is you'll see sometimes that horses have another piece below the nose band. Where's everything here? So they'll have actually a nose band that goes over here. This doesn't have a nose band on it. This is called the shadow roll. But if you don't have this fuzzy piece on here, okay, there's just a piece of nylon down there that goes over their nose. Okay, and that kind of keeps their mouth closed to a certain extent. Okay, if you have horses that get more aggressive with their mouth and you see them run across here with their mouth wide open, they actually have 3 different types of things. They'll have what's called a drop nose band, and so they'll have another piece on here that goes right around their mouth. They'll have a rubber one that figure 8s around there, or they have what's called a figure 8 that's a whole piece that kind of figure 8s. But what it does, it keeps that mouth closed. When they get their mouth open, the tendency to flip that palate again increases, okay? So we use this to mitigate it, and what they'll do is they'll use what's called a figure 8 or a drop nose band or a rubber figure 8 to keep that mouth from getting open. So horses that get their mouth open have a tougher time being controlled by the riders. They also have a higher chance of stopping their breathing. So we'll put the equipment on there to change that. Now, when she said 99% of horses use this, that probably typically maybe 6 years ago, 10 years ago was the case. I still think it's a pretty high degree. But a lot of people now have gone to where they just put the figure 8 or the drop noseband on, and they leave this off. And the reason they do that is their theory is that when a horse displaces and you have a tongue tie on, it can't replace. And so it's stuck without the air. What their theory is that if they can control the mouth from getting open, stop it from happening in the first place, but if they do, then they can put their tongue back and replace it and get it back in position again. So their theory is within 4 or 5 strides, they're putting it back in place, getting their air again. This one stops them from doing it possibly. I don't know which one is more prevalent, but I still go with this. And I think it's probably on a horse-by-horse basis what you view your horse as doing and how you want to help them out with their behaviors.
As Tom mentioned, this is a shadow roll, and you'll see this on horses whether it's a rainy, a sunny day, and this is exactly the usage describes itself. It is to prevent horses from jumping shadows. You'll see, I'm trying to see if there's a shadow on the track right now, but horses, right around that turn, you'll see a small shadow, and you'll see horses, sometimes if the tractor has left a tire mark, or if there's the starting gate, or even from the rail, you'll see sometimes horses will jump during a race, and it's simply to prevent that. Also, it's very important because you'll notice this fluffy material, horses that will wear it on rainy days, this be covered with saran wrap, because even though it's very light now, during a rainy day, this can get up to 3 to 4 pounds with the kickback of mud and rain. So if a trainer forgets, or a groom or assistant trainer forgets to do that, it can definitely prevent a horse from a couple of lengths.
Another thing you'll see, one gentleman that uses a lot is Bob Baffert. He uses almost virtually every horse. And part of it, I think, too, is some horses carry their head high because they're seeing the shadows and they're thinking that something need to jump. The only area that a horse can see with binocular vision, so depth perception, is about 30 degrees in front of its head on either side. So if it's over here, they can't see depth. If it's over here, they can't. But all the shadows they're running towards are in front of them in their binocular vision, so they actually have depth perception. The other thing that this will do is, if you can imagine a horse running and it's on their head, and the dirt's coming up from in front of them, it blocks that dirt from coming up and getting in their eyes. So this has kind of multi-purpose. Even though most people use it for shadows, and it's been called, a lot of times I'll use it for horses that shy from dirt. They'll throw their head up when it hits them in the face, and hitting them in the eyes. So I'm putting this on instead to stop that dirt from getting up in front of their face. And so there's multiple uses, but you'll see like Bob Baffert uses it virtually on everything. I don't think every horse needs it, but it's just his way of saying, you know what, I'm just going to take it out of the equation. We won't have that issue. The horse will be happier. We'll throw it on there.
Another thing to kind of help horses focus are blinkers. And there are multiple different types of blinkers. And why I say that is because these are cups. And there are multiple different types of cups and different ways you can use cups. So if you'll hold on to this set for me, because as these are Tom's specific ones, you'll see that he's actually cut a hole in this set. And there's different types. There's full cup. There's obviously just like women's women's cups.
Well,
there's
a
lot of different types of blinkers.
Yeah.
But explain the different. I mean, just like every different horse, or not every horse wears blinkers, but every horse has their own different needs. So explain the different types of blinkers and why you might cut a hole in a set of blinkers.
Okay, so blinkers traditionally are used to make a horse focus. Like we talked about their vision, the only area that they have binocular vision, so they can see with both eyes and have depth perception, is in front of them, about 30 degrees. On either side, almost all the way back to their tail, it's okay, it's monocular vision. So they can't tell if you're 6 feet away from me, or you're 2 feet away from me, or you're 10 feet away from me. They can't tell if you're 10 feet tall or 14 feet tall. And so a lot of these horses will respond their flight mechanism to stimuluses on either side of them. Okay, and these stop that for horse from seeing it. So they stop them seeing too much on the side if they react to it negatively. Okay, what they'll do is you put this on to see if they can focus everything forward, and then we'll change it to varying degrees depending on how much focus they need. This here has holes in it, and then what that does is it allows them to see a horse coming up from behind them to get a little glimpse of him before he gets in front of him, where he can see with without his blinkers blocking it. And so you'll see different sizes, different types, depending on what we need the horse to accomplish with the change of equipment. And so some horses, like I actually have a horse that I'm going to run here next weekend that he's gotten past the last couple times, and it comes back and he's got a ton of energy. I thought, gosh, he just didn't give me everything he had. What's the reasoning? And so I went back and looked, and we just got him a couple races ago, and from the very first time he started, he's had blinkers on. So he's never been able to see a horse coming from behind him. Every time he's run well, he's been passing horses, but he doesn't pass them back once they go. He doesn't compete and dig in. So next start we're going to do is we're going to take the blinkers off and give him a chance to say, hey, I've matured enough. I don't need these to correct my performance. So I'm going to see if we can get him some more effort out of it without him seeing the horses coming from behind, blocking that vision. Now we can change that and let him see him. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that was my favorite story about your dad was a very famous set of blinkers and one of the most famous horses in racing, and that was Gate Dancer. Mm-hmm. So he kind of looked like a bunny rabbit when he wore them, and a jockey almost didn't ride Gate Dancer.
He didn't ride him.
Well, he didn't ride
Eddie
Gate Dancer.
took off him, yeah.
Yeah.
So
big mistake, Eddie, big mistake.
Gate Dancer ran in the Derby, and he was notorious. He was a supremely talented horse, but he was notorious. Whenever he'd come down the stretch, he would turn his head like this and lug in and bump the horses, and he would get disqualified. In fact, he got disqualified the Bluegrass, the prep right before the Derby. He won the Bluegrass and got disqualified. And so he ran in the Derby, and he did the same thing. And what my dad theorized is that whenever he'd get to the stretch, and Gate Dancer was a top handicap horse, a 3-year-old at the time, and he heard that crowd yelling, he would turn his head to listen to him, and he'd look at him. And just like you or us,
he loved the fan club,
yeah, he
right?
did. He wanted to admire his fans out there. And so just like you or us, when you like driving and you start looking at something, next thing you know, your car's veering off the side. That's what he would do. And so Dad, when he was on a trip to South America looking at horses, he saw them that they had these nets on their ears. It was for them, it's for bugs, because they shake their head when the bugs get in their ears. But what he thought is, what if I put some material from like a couch cushion in there, it'll block that sound. And so what typically trainers would do is they take a piece of cotton and ball it up in their ears. But my father, when he was young, he said whenever I had an ear infection, I put that cotton in my ear, I'd shake it all the time. It drove me nuts. He said I couldn't stand the feeling of it, And so what he did is, like, if I put the earmuffs on, it doesn't get in their ear. It won't affect that thing. And so what he did is put it on to Gate Dancer, and Eddie Dallahousse took off of him because he said he's crazy, I'm not going to ride him. He looks goofy in those things. And the next race back was the Preakness, and he won the Preakness. So it was just one of those things where you change equipment and you try to help the horse perform better, to enjoy it more. Whatever it is, it's going to give that horse an advantage by, mitigating the negative behavior or the negative reactions to, some type of input. And so that's where the earmuffs were kind of born. And you'll see them, we still use them today on some horses. Unfortunately, mine either got, the ear partly chewed off by some barn pests or a horse. I'm not sure which one got it, so they're in repair right now. So I couldn't bring them for Nancy.
It's amazing how many horsemen now utilize kind of the same principle in a different way. You'll notice a lot of horses come to the paddock with sponges in their ears, connected by a string. Steve Asmussen does it, Ron Moquette does it, Johnny Ortiz does it, and you'll notice they'll come to the paddock, and then they'll remove them in the starting gate, so that way they can hear everything. They're then given to the gate crew or the pony rider, but they kind of have utilized that same method. So it's kind of, transferred through the last several decades, which is really interesting. One thing that I did want to compare, where's the exercise saddle? Oh, right there. So that is just a stark comparison that I think is just so fascinating that I think people will really enjoy. Can you grab that exercise saddle? The comparison from a exercise saddle. Chris, can you move your camera? This is an exercise saddle that is used every single day.
I feel that one.
This is actually Joel Rosario, a future Hall of Famer. This is a jockey saddle. So feel the comparison between a jockey saddle, what the jockeys use during racing. It's unbelievable. And that's, now mind you, that is on the smaller side of a jockey saddle. And now you'll notice in the program there are weights which are assigned in accordance to the conditions of the race. If, say, a jockey is going to carry 124 pounds, obviously there's not a jockey that weighs 124 pounds. Back in the day, they would put lead weights in the saddle.
You argue with that one. There might be some that weigh 124 pounds.
Well, back in the day, they might have. But they no longer carry lead weights because there was maybe a little too much. They were distributed in a saddle. Now we have something a little different. They have lead pads, so it's easier to distribute. And this sucker obviously is 6 pounds. That's a little heavy, but it was also maybe a little enticing for riders to maybe chuck those weights. But mind you, this is way back in the day.
Now the cameras catch them doing those things.
Now they can't do that because they carry the lead pads. So you figure the riders will now put a lead pad underneath their saddle as opposed to just being super heavy with lead weights packed all over in their tack. So
and the big difference is the only part of this that they use during a race are these.
They need a rope and some stirrups.
They really don't. This is only there to keep these in place for them.
The
so they can put
saddle
their
is
feet
completely
in.
irrelevant.
The only time
they don't
they'll
need
use
that.
this at all is in the post parade when they're with the pony. Pretty much the rest of the time they're balancing on their feet and with their legs, and so you don't see anything. This is pretty non-existent. Whereas in the morning they're spending more time on their butts, and so that's what you see the big difference in saddle structure for.
And you can see this is their footwear that they use during racing. So it's very minimal what they need. All they need is just some stirrups, their boots, and their crop to have horse will travel. So as you can see, their track is back open for training. Tom, tell us who you have coming on the track right now.
We have a little horse, should be coming around here in a second, gray horse. He's pretty ornery, so he's with the pony. But his name is Icarus. And so we're going to try to run this weekend, but the race is a little too short, so we're trying to find a spot for him. But
Didn't he win last out?
Last two out. He's 2 in a row.
Oh.
Yeah.
So he's looking to make it a hat trick here.
And actually, the client had me nominated for the Oaklawn handicap, which might be a little bit of a stretch. But if there's some scratches and some people don't show up,
he does like to go all day.
He does.
He does like to go all day. So I do want to thank all of you for coming out this morning, and feel free to come up and take a look at all of the tack that we have out here. And thanks for joining us. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Tom.